All right, folks. Well, thanks so much for being here. We are spending the day traveling in southern Alberta, listening to people's concerns. And today I've heard a lot about three things. The first has to do with the ongoing controversy around coal mining in the Eastern Slopes, and just how people are nervous about it, just how they're worried about its impact on recreation. I spent some time with some fly fishermen this morning, on agriculture, and on the general quality of life in this area. And no one can understand what the political benefit to this government is. It's clearly something Albertans don't want. It's clearly something that has very little economic benefit for a lot of environmental risk. And the question that I've been hearing on everyone's lips is, what is Brian Jean, what is Danielle Smith thinking? This is a terrible idea. Speaking of terrible ideas, burning coal, rolling coal, also a terrible idea. Part two. Speaking of terrible ideas, folks have been talking to me a lot about the latest challenge with AHS, which really just sort of proves that for this government, cruelty is part of the plan. Telling kids with cancer they can't have popsicles. Now, the Minister of Health and the Premier are madly backpedaling, saying they never meant to deny patients sustenance. But we've known for weeks now that Alberta Health Services has sent out a memo saying government directive is no more apple juice after you take a test that you've been fasting all day for. No more food if you're stuck in the ER for many, many hours and you're too sick to be able to go to the cafeteria or the vending machine. And yes, no more popsicles for kids undergoing cancer treatments. We've known about it for months. How come the people who run AHS, the Minister of Health and the Premier, claim to not know about this at all? It's just another example of two things. Number one, their overall incompetence, how they have so much trouble running the system. But number two, how they make outrageous claims and then walk them back marginally while the root policy is still there. And the third thing, of course, that I've been hearing a lot about is it's no fool on April Fool's Day. People are so scared about what President Trump may do tomorrow, about tariffs, about how that will impact their quality of life, how that will impact everything from supply costs for farmers and ranchers to the ability to get our products to market. And universally, people are saying Danielle Smith's strategy isn't working. Sucking up to extremists in the US, assuming that they're going to be charmed by her and it'll cause President Trump to drop his entire economic policy isn't working. She has no backup plan. And in fact, we learned today that her backup plan is to team up with the province of Quebec and be separatists together. Listen, I love this country way too much to play games like that. We don't play dice with this country. It's something that has been built for hundreds and thousands of years on this land, and the Premier ought not to be so careless. Once again, she's showing an appalling lack of judgment. So there you go. A few things for you guys to think about, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, I guess just, sorry. Oh,
No, go ahead.
sorry, I can hardly hear. I guess just with the Premier entertaining the idea of a referendum on separation, can you maybe just in more detail on your thoughts on that?
You know, last week, 2 weeks ago now, she and I both met with the Prime Minister on the same day. We were lobbying for some very similar things, some quite different things. The difference is I was able to have a conversation with the Prime Minister and help him understand why what we need here in Alberta is good for Alberta and good for the country. She, in what has been described as the worst political meeting ever, basically acted like a petulant toddler and threatened a national unity crisis if she didn't get every single thing she wanted. And when she's been asked about that, she said she wants to have yet another fair deal panel. Premier, we've already had one of those, and we know exactly what they're going to say. Most Albertans don't agree with you. Most Albertans are proud Canadians too. And if you want to go off and fight to steal the CPP, if you want to go off and create an Alberta Police Service, that is not what Albertans want. And why are we going through another panel? In reality, let's call the Premier's bluff. If you want to flirt with separatists, if you want your Chief of Staff or your Deputy Chief of Staff to tweet and then quickly delete separatist-friendly content, you know what, Premier? Call a referendum on separatism. Let Albertans tell you what they really think, only if you promise to leave public life when you lose.
Do you mind responding to a comment she made over the weekend when she was in Florida, where she said that would be like adding another California to your electoral
She's so funny. First of all, she was at a private event that was not videotaped or live streamed, so we have to rely on secondhand information. Second of all, she claims victory that she somehow, by taking 4 staffers to Florida for a 20-minute fireside chat, convinced Ben Shapiro to talk about tariffs. In fact, he's been talking about tariffs for months. He is already thinks that tariffs are a bad idea because he thinks Canada should be annexed. Because he thinks Canada is a silly country that should be the 51st state. This is who the Premier hangs out with. And now, on the one hand, she's encouraging foreign interference in elections by saying we need to get rid of the Liberals. And on the other hand, telling Republican voters that, you know what, you're never going to get Conservative government in Canada. Like, she just says different things to different audiences because there's no coherence to what she's saying. There's no strategy, there's no plan. And bluntly, she needs to stop making light of Canada's sovereignty. She needs to stop saying 51st state talk is hilarious, and she needs to stand up and fight for Canada. It's something we haven't seen from her yet.
Ahead of Donald Trump's quote Liberation Day that's expected tomorrow, there's a lot of Canadians that are calling for the Premier to enact tariffs on Alberta energy and oil. This is something she has been adamant on not doing, saying they will be detrimental to the industry. What have been your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, it's not the Premier's call. She always tells the federal government to stay in its lane. This is very much the federal government's call. But here's the thing. She is the worst negotiator I've ever seen. She plays poker with her cards face up. And here's the deal. When you look at Doug Ford, he knows how to bare his teeth in a negotiation. He knew how to say, hey, we're going to cut off electricity to the U.S. He never did cut off electricity to the U.S., but he got a call from Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick that day. And sure enough, the next day, the tariffs were delayed by a month. The Premier, on the other hand, says, instead of showing my teeth, I'm just going to roll over for you. And this is no way to negotiate with a guy like Donald Trump. You know, he wrote a book called The Art of the Deal. I suggest the Premier read it.
To go off of that, new Nanos data was for CTV was released, and it shows that more than 2/3 of Canadians would support tariffs on oil and gas. This morning we asked Premier Danielle Smith about that, and she called that survey garbage. What is your response to?
Well, the Premier really hates evidence that disagrees with her worldview. She doesn't believe in evidence-based decision-making. The fact is, her so-called charm offensive hasn't even convinced Canadians of her point of view, let alone Americans. And she needs to live with that. And we need to understand that whatever she's doing, or she thinks she's doing, isn't working, and she's not as charming as she thinks she is.
Take parties out of it, take politics out of it. How would you hope that this would be dealt with?
Well, we have a 5-fold plan for living in a tariff world. Number one, strongly building Canadian markets for our goods and services, building a solid market from coast to coast to coast to 40 million people. Number two, dealing with the United States in a strategic negotiation-based way that the president can hear. You know, the Prime Minister said he wouldn't even meet with the president unless he stopped his 51st state talk. Danielle Smith said 51st state talk was hilarious. The Prime Minister got some concessions and the tone has changed. So let's think about how to do that. Let's think about how to be smart in terms of our export products to the United States and make sure they understand that in many ways they need us more than we need them. Number three, let's work hard on creating global markets, not the Premier's pipe dreams, but real pipelines. So real opportunity to export our markets, to build our markets. For example, here in Southern Alberta, we need to build more global markets for our agricultural products. The Premier's 9 demands have nothing to do with agriculture. I haven't heard a word about potatoes or canola or cow-calf or our beef or pork industries. So we need to be able to build more global markets so that we're not so reliant on the U.S. Number four, another thing the Premier hasn't said a word about, is we need to actually make sure that we're protecting people from the tariffs. Businesses are going to close. Farms are going to close. People are going to be thrown out of work as early as tomorrow. And the Premier has no plan for how we help people who are hurt by this, how we help them retrain, how we help them build their businesses back up again. And number five, let's not be so defensive all the time. Let's use our sword. And our sword is people don't want to go to the United States. They don't want to go there for tourism. They don't want to live there. They don't want to do research there. So we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to recruit great professors, great doctors, great nurses to great universities like the University of Lethbridge, and make sure that we're saying Canada is a welcoming place. And we can't do that if we have Team U Trump as our premier. We actually need to be able to say to people, things will be different here.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Specifically here in Lethbridge, I believe we were considered to be the 10th most at-risk city in Canada for the tariffs. There's a lot of affordability talk and concern right now here in the city. Everything from rent prices to, carbon taxes now, I guess, off the table. But, the tariffs, I guess just what would be your message to the people of Lethbridge who are concerned about the prices of everything?
When I go across the province, I consistently hear people are concerned about three things. They're concerned about the cost of living, they're concerned about the future of jobs for themselves, their kids, and their grandkids, and they're concerned about public health care. And this government, frankly, has failed on all three of those things. Their only affordability measure at all, in a place where we have housing prices increasing, where we have auto insurance as the most expensive in Canada, is a $2 a day tax cut. Even with the carbon tax gone, that won't fill up a tank of gas a month. And we need to take seriously issues that are under the province's direct control. We can't do a lot about grocery prices. We can do a lot about auto insurance. We can do a lot about utility rates. We can do a lot about housing. And this government really has shown no instinct in doing any of that.
With the federal NDP being in Edmonton and you being here, are you taking a step back to stay away from federal politics a little bit?
Yeah, like Doug Ford and unlike Premier Smith, I think Albertans are smart enough to make their own choices federally. And I will continue to push all the parties on what is right for Alberta. But I'm not endorsing anybody. I'm not getting involved in anything. The Premier has spent so much political capital and so much of Alberta taxpayer money on trying to get Pierre Poilievre elected. Now, the joke in the legislature is every time she opens her mouth, she makes it less likely for Pierre Poilievre to get elected. So the Liberals and the New Democrats should claim Danielle Smith as a campaign donation to them.
With the province announcing money for a new urgent care facility in Airdrie that is privately run, and Lethbridge, we're in a situation where we could be in line for a private one instead of a public one.
So MLA Rob Miyashiro has been working really hard for many, many years on the healthcare needs here in Lethbridge. I continue to be frustrated, for example, that the province has announced a cardiac sciences facility to help people who've had heart attacks at the Chinook Regional Hospital so many times and hasn't actually funded it. Similarly, they've announced a bunch of schools, they funded construction of none of them. Now, what we really have to be careful of is the creeping privatization in healthcare. We know from a recent study that the private surgical facilities have not reduced wait times, that 9 out of 11 procedures have seen their wait times go up since we've had the private facilities, and they're way more expensive. Now, the province did suggest that all of these urgent care centers, except for the one in Airdrie, would be publicly run. They originally said by AHS, and then they said by somebody through a competitive process. They're making it up as they go along. And we have to realize that what this experiment has shown us is that public health care publicly delivered is more effective and it saves us money.
To circle back on energy, I want to hear your thoughts on this. There's been talk within Manitoba to revamp or renew sort of the ports of Churchill and Port Nelson to export energy to international markets, especially in Europe. Is this something that you guys have been considering and putting your thought towards?
Yeah, I personally believe in an all of the above strategy to try and find global ways to get our material to global markets in a way that nonetheless continues our push on the fight against climate change. Churchill is challenging. You need icebreakers. It's not always ice-free, though ironically climate change makes that port work a little bit better. That said, we need to look at all of these examples, but we also have to remember that any new pipeline is a decade out. once it's constructed. And the only pipeline that we have going to Tidewater, which is our saving grace right now because it can quickly be expanded and shifted to global markets, is the Trans Mountain expansion. The Trans Mountain expansion happened because Rachel Notley, with an able assist from the then mayor of Calgary, worked their butts off to get that thing built. Conservative governments have built precisely 0 miles of pipeline to Tidewater, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, particularly because the Premier can't seem to decide which projects she's actually in favor of. Okay. I feel like that was very comprehensive. Thanks very much, folks.